Hi, and welcome to the Golaem Quickstart tutorial. In this video, we'll show you how to create a crowd simulation scene and render it. If you don't have Golem installed yet, you can ask for an evaluation here. It brings you to the evaluation form, and as soon as you fill and submit the form, you will receive an email with the download and evaluation links. The installation is pretty straightforward, but if you need help, you can just jump to the support section of the website, and we got a pretty detailed installation guide there. Okay, so let's start Mario. When Golem is installed, it automatically appears into the plugin manager. So to load the Golem plugin, you can jump into the window menu here, settings, preference, plugin manager, and find out the Golem plugin, which is here. Just click on it to load it. You can even check the auto load checkbox if you want to, and when it's loaded, it creates a Golem shelf with the most used feature here as different buttons here, as well as two menus here, the Golem menu and the Golem render menu. The first thing we'd like to do is maybe checking what's the status of the license. So you can go into the Golem menu and about, and depending what your status, if you're doing an evaluation, you should get your evaluation status here. If you get a full license, you should get the name of your full license and how long it is available for, etc., etc. You may also want to take a look at is there a new version which has been released since the last time you've been running the software, you've been installing the software, as well as checking the release notes for the different versions and what's been available. So the second thing we'd like to do is also checking that your Maya is correctly configured for Golem. So you can use the check scene settings button here into the shelf, which will analyze the different Maya settings. So you want to first make sure that your playback speed is set to play every frame, because Golem relies on particles and we want that every frame get evaluated. If it's not the case here, you can just right click into the timeline and go into playback speed and make sure that you're either in play every frame 3 or play every frame max real time. I usually prefer to have the max real time option activated, which means that I'll get the same FPS into the viewport that I should get into the rendering sequence. You also want to make sure that the linear working unit is set to centimeters, like the Maya linear working unit is set to centimeters. That doesn't mean that you have to work in centimeters, but that's just the default Maya settings that you want to make sure you're following. And finally, you want to make sure that locators, plugin shapes, and polygons are shown. Once again, if it's not the case, you're just have to check this and to check the different options here into the show panel. The first step in setting up the crowd scene consists in creating a type of characters we'll have into the scene. So I'm going to use that button here with the white and the orange characters. When I'm going to click on this, it's going to create a node we called the crowd entity type. So the crowd entity type is a node which has a couple of attributes. So as soon as you select it, you can see into the attribute editors the different attributes the node has. As you can see, first it requires a character file. So I'm going to load a character file from the Golem assets. You should have downloaded the Golem assets at the same time you downloaded the Golem package, and as soon as you install it, you end up with that kind of folder hierarchy. So if you jump into the Golem directory, characters, you end up with a bunch of ready to use characters. So there's a soldier, a horse, so there's a medieval soldier, a Roman soldier, a horse, a couple of casual men, casual woman, and a bull character. So here I'm going to use the Crowdman Light character file. So I'm just double clicking on it, and it will be loaded here. The entity type has some attributes about display, but we'll speak about this a bit later. It has some attributes about how is it going to be rendered, but as well we speak about this a bit later. And it also has an attribute about what are the behaviors which are going to be played by that type of characters. There are some display attributes, and you can see here those characters are going to be green. Once I have created my type of characters, I can have as many types as I'd like to into my scene. As soon as I create my type here, I can create a terrain on which my character will be adapted. So here I just want to define a default plain terrain. So I can just click on that terrain locator button here. It creates a default plain terrain. It creates a new node in the scene as well. And that terrain gets automatically linked to the rest of the simulation, which means now my characters will know that there is a terrain which is at 8.0 and they will adapt their footprints on that terrain. Okay, once I have defined my terrain, I can actually place my characters. Golem relies on Maya particles to store and place the characters, which means if you want to place crowd entities into your simulation, you have to place particles. You can use Maya emitters to do so, or you can use our population tool. So as it's a tool, you double click on it. It opens the tool settings, the Maya tool settings of the tool here. You got a chance to use different shapes, or you can even select different polygons and use those selection like vertices, edges, or faces as a locator to place your characters. Here I'm going to stick with just the grid. So it's creating just I'm just clicking once into the viewport. It's creating a locator in the scene, a new node, and I can control that locator attribute, so I can specify how many characters I want to have, what's going to be the distance between those characters, noising a bit the position. I can change the orientation as well, noising a bit the orientation. When I can change the number of lines and columns as well, etc., etc. When I'm happy with that design, I can just press create. And as I was saying, Golem is just is a particle-based crowd simulation system. So that tool here, as soon as you press create, it creates a new particle system here. And if I just rewind the sim and play a couple of frames, now I should have my characters popping where I place them and into the correct orientation. Something to keep in mind is we are based on particle, which means that if you want to get result from frame 70, you have to run the simulation until frame 70. And every time you do a change into your simulation, you have to jump back into the start frame of the simulation to be able to see this change. So if you want to see result of frame, you have to run the 69 frames right before. Once a simulation has been initialized, you can go back into the check scene settings and you'll have more checkings appearing here. So here as well, everything is okay, but if at some point you get a problem, it's always a good thing to first check the scene settings just to check that there's nothing obvious which has been missed. So let's take a look at the solution now. As you can see, we're not doing anything yet because we haven't defined any behavior. And in terms of display, what we see here is just a box which is displayed per bone. You can even click on a character at any point into the simulation to bring it visual feedback. If by error you just close it, you can go back into that shelf icon here with the magnifier on top of the character to see how does the visual feedback of that character looks like. So speaking about the visual feedback, you can see a couple of information. So you can see the posture of the character. It's a viewport on its own, so you can even move the camera and see how it's going on. It's actually following the character, and you'll get some couple of information about that entity. So what's his ID, what's the speed it's moving at, what's its particle ID. So now let's change the display mode of the characters. Let's go back into the entity type, and you can see that within the entity type there is a drop down which is called display mode. Right now the characters are set to animation bones, but you can switch to another mode which is called render previews, and in this mode here we'll load the geometry of the character and display the geometry of the characters. As you can see, the characters are all orange, which is the Golem default shaders. So if you want your characters to be shaded within the viewport, you can import the shaders and they will be applied on that graphics generated geometry. So let's jump into the Golem render menu and use the import crowd shaders option. So it's saying that no shaders are currently missing, but then I'm going to overwrite this. So I'm going to press yes, please. And I'm going to check within the Golem assets pack, the Golem character pack, where are the shaders. So they are into Golem, shaders, and here for each character and for each rendering engine you get a different file. So make sure you pick the right one for the right rendering engine. Here I'm going to use Arnold as a rendering engine. So I want to use the Crowd Light, which is the character I've been loaded into my entity type, and I want to use the AR, which stands for Arnold. So I'm double clicking on that file. It's actually importing a Maya character, so that's Maya geometry with some shaders applied on top of this. So this is the geometry which will hold the shaders. So you can just leave it within the scene origin, because all the meshes have some primary visibility which is checked off. Make sure not to hide the characters, that character, else you won't have any shaders, or you can just move it away from the camera first time if you like to. If I rewind the simulation and play a couple of frames, my characters don't get updated. You have to manually say that you want to update your render preview display. So you can jump back into your entity type here, go into render previous display attribute and ask for the geometry to get refreshed. So now you can see it's actually loading the shaders. Just move a bit the viewport so the shaders get updated properly and the texture get loaded as well. As you can see, there are some assets variation within the scene. Some characters have some pants and t-shirts, some characters have some short pants, some characters have some sweatshirts. So all that asset variation is actually defined within the character file we loaded here. If you want to change that geometry variation, you have to go into the character maker. So you can go through that button here, which opens the character maker, or you can go into your entity type and next to your character file you can click on that character maker icon, which will open the character maker tool, but in addition will load the character file you're actually using. The character maker is going to be used to define how does the skeleton of the characters look like and how does the geometry of the characters look like. So this is the skeleton definition, and if you jump here to geometry, this is the geometry definition of the character. So there are plenty of different tutorials which explains how does that tool work. So here I'm just going to focus onto the rendering types panel here. So as you can see, this is where you define your repartition. So there are two different stuff you can change the repartition for. There's the undercoat group, which has either a t-shirt or a sweatshirt, and next to each other you get different weights, so you can define how many sweatshirts you want to have and how many t-shirts you want to have. You don't have to make sure that this is 100% because it's going to be computed as relative repartition. Here you're just saying that there's going to be 5 more entities with the t-shirt than people with the sweatshirt. And the other asset you can change is the pants asset. So you can say, okay, do you want to have short pants or long pants? And right now I'm just having half and half. So I can say, okay, I don't want to have sweatshirt anymore in the scene, so I can just put that slider value to 0. I want to make sure that I save the character file, and now that I saved the character file, the next time I'm gonna throw the simulation, I'll get all my characters with t-shirts. Regarding the render previous display mode, as you can see, you get pretty everything. So you get skinning, you get asset repartition, you get blend shapes animation, you get shading as well. The only thing you're not gonna get here is shading variation. The main reason, because as you can see, they're all wearing the same t-shirts, but obviously when I'm gonna render the crowd, they will have different colors of t-shirts. The main reason why the render previous display mode doesn't support shading variation is because we can't really afford to analyze Arnold shading graph or Manta Ray or Random shading graph, because you may do some pretty heavy and complicated shading graphs. So what we do is we just look at what's the first texture we can find into that shading graph and use that to shade every character within the render previous. But once again, when you're going to render those crowds, you can have shading variation on top of that. Okay, what about rendering that scene now? Obviously, the first thing I want to do is set up the rendering engine. So here I'm going to use Arnold. I also want to add a default light, so I'm going to use Skydome light here. And now that I've done this, I need to export the Golem simulation as a simulation cache. To do so, I can use the simulation exporter. So I'm going to specify which crowd I want to use, so which particle system I want to export, what's going to be the name of my cache, so let's rename that Quickstart, what's going to be the start frame and the end frame of my simulation export, and then I can run this and export this. So here it's just running the simulation and baking the simulation result into a cache. It's important to remember that it's not baking the geometry, it's just baking postures. As soon as the simulation has been exported, you can see that now the timeline color has changed. It's now green, and that icon here is now enabled and is set to cache replay mode. So when using Golem, you can be into two different modes, one which is called cache replay. So as the name tells, it allows you to see how does the simulation look like, which means the simulation is not executed anymore, it's not evaluated anymore, it's just now the result of the simulation cache you're viewing into Maya. So you don't have to rewind to the first frame to see how does frame 70 looks like, you just have to jump into frame 70 to see how does frame 70 looks like. If at some point you want to go back into simulation mode, you can just press that button here. It just allows you to toggle between simulation mode, where you can see how does the simulation look like, where you can see the characters working with the behavior editor icon next to it, or into cache replay mode, where you see how does the simulation results look like. As soon as you're in cache replay mode, it creates a node which is called simulation cache proxy, which has the link to all the information where you've been exporting the cache. So what's the name of the cache, where has it been exported, what's the first frame, the end frame. You can decimate, let's say you're having a really heavy simulation, you can decimate how many characters you want to draw and render into the viewport. As soon as you are in cache replay mode and you're having that cache proxy and you're having your characters and the timeline is actually colored, you can actually render your crowd. So just press the render button here and the characters are going to be rendered. So the rendering process consists in first placing the bounding box for every characters, and as soon as Arnold will hit a bounding box, we're going to generate the geometry on the fly, compute the skinning, compute the shading, compute the asset repartition, and send this back to Arnold. So as I was saying earlier, you can see that even if in the viewport they were all wearing that blue t-shirt, when you're going to do the render, you'll get all the shading variation. One useful tip, as we're still in the rendering process, is if at some point you got problem with the rendering and you can't really know what's going on, we got here a render checker. So that guys has that green icon here which tells you that everything is fine, but if it's not, it may have a orange cross on top of it, and if you click on it, it's gonna actually analyze the scene and tells you what you missed in your scene. So maybe you forgot to set up properly the bounding box of the characters, maybe some shaders attribute has not been exported, maybe some shaders are missing on the scene, or maybe the version of the rendering engine you're using is not supported by Golem right now. So as soon as you got a problem, always referring to the render checker can be a good idea. So, okay, Roger. Next step will be adding some behaviors to the characters. So right now they're just playing a T-pose. Let's say I want to play a motion. To add behaviors, I'm going to use the behavior editor here. So I'm going to open, and if we take a look at that interface here, you end up with your different entity types. So this is my entity types I'm using right now for my green characters which are within the scene. When you double click on it, so let's say that's what you're supposed to get the first time you open the tool. If you double click on it, it opens the behavior container of that entity type. So this is the behaviors which are played by all your characters right now into the simulation. So on the left is the starting point of the simulation, and on the right is the ending point of the simulation. Here it's yellow because I have a character which is picked into the viewport. So let's just unpick that character here and let's refresh. So now I'm in the default mode. Let's say I want to play motion onto my character, so I'm gonna drag and drop motion behavior, which is the third icon here, and I'm gonna drop it onto the behavior flow. It creates a motion behavior node, and that node is just a Maya node which has a couple of attributes. If I double click on that motion behavior node, it opens a file browser where I can actually pick my motion. So once again, if you go into the character pack, into the directory Golem, you're having a motion directory, and you're having a couple of motions you can use on any of your characters. So there's a locomotion animation with a couple of walks, runs, horse and riders animation for the horse and the rider, some battle animation for the soldiers, and some audience animation if you like to make stadium. So I'm gonna take a look into the audience directory, into the loop one, and I'm gonna play like the sit watching to animation here. So my motion behavior now has been configured with a sit watching animation, and if I rewind the sim and play the sim, right now you can see that the characters are all T-posed. So that's something you want to make sure you're really used to it. Is here right now I'm in cache replay mode. So whatever the change I'm doing into the behavior editor, they're not taking into account because here it's just replaying the cache as have been previously exported. So if you want to see the result of the simulation, you have to re-switch back to simulation mode by clicking on that icon here. So now I'm in simulation mode, and if I rewind the sim to frame 1 and run a couple of frames, now I'm having my characters playing the result of the simulation. As soon as you pick a character, you can see the visual feedback of the character, so you can see his posture. You can see also the footprints, how it adapts to the ground. So as soon as you get those green circles below every limb here, it means that the feet will be adapted to the ground. You can see that is playing a motion behavior. So motion B, motion shape 1 is playing that motion. So sit watching shape 2, and you can see where is right now where is that character into the motion. So if we click on every of those guys, you can see they're all playing the same frame. So that's why they all look the same for now. You can hide the motion you're playing, or you can even use that small button here to select the motion behavior and change the properties. As soon as the visual feedback is enabled, you can also jump into the behavior editor, and you can see for every character what the behaviors is currently playing. So if you end up with a pretty huge and complicated graph with a lot of branching, it's a good way to see where your characters are at, what are the different properties which have been evaluated, and what are the different behaviors which are running right now. So let's add a bit more variety to the posture of my characters. So as I was saying, right now they're all playing the same posture. So if I select my motion behavior using that icon here, I can maybe tweak a bit the different parameters. So the first parameter I'd like to tweak will be the start percent, mean and max. So it just tells where each character should start the animation. So I can just change the ratio so every character can pick any frame within the motion. As the motion loops, I'm not gonna have any popping. I may also want to change the speed ratio, so some characters may play that animation faster, some may play it a bit slower. So I'm gonna just increase the range here and play a couple of frames, and now you can see that guy here is playing that motion at 15%. That guy here is playing 35% of the animation. Right now is at 68%. So just a good way to add variety. If you want to render that new simulation, you have to go through the same process, which is exporting the simulation to overwrite the cache which is used right now into the cache replay. So if I switch to the cache replay mode, I'm still ending up with my T-pose character. So you want to override this. So go into simulation mode, open the simulation exporter, and re-export the simulation. It's re-evaluated the simulation and re-exporting the postures of the characters into the Golem simulation cache. As soon as it's done, the simulation exporter process switch automatically back to cache replay mode. So now I'm having my characters playing their sitting animation. And obviously, now that I have updated my cache, I can just update my render and see how does it look at rendering time. So now I'm having all my characters seated and rendering my new simulation result. The other interesting thing when you're in cache replay mode is that you can still edit the properties of the cache even if it's been simulated and exported by using the simulation cache layout. To open the simulation cache layout, press on that button here. It opens a new panel which will hold all your layering operation you're heading on top of the cache. So different layers are actually available. If you press F9 within the Maya viewport to go into component mode, now you can select a bunch of characters and apply deformation on top of it. So the deformation can be translation by pressing W onto your keyboard to get the translate tool. You can just grab a group of characters and translate them. Even if the simulation has been exported, even if the simulation has been cached, you're still able to apply deformation on top of this. As soon as I have moved my characters, you can see that a new layer has appeared into the simulation cache layout tool. So you can actually disable that layout or re-enable it, or you can even double click on it and just change the properties to have exactly maybe a shift of 7 units. And one thing to remember, which is super important, is that it's not altering the cache files you've been exporting, which means here those are just layers which are added on top of the simulation cache files. The cache files are not changed or modified in any sense. Amongst the different layers, there's also a rotation tool. If you press E onto your keyboard, you end up with the rotation gizmo, and if you press R, you end up with the scale gizmo, where you can scale the distance between your characters, or when you're in word mode, if you're in object mode into your scale tool, you're able to rescale the size of your characters. There are plenty of different layers which can be used. There's also like a duplicate layer, so you can select those guys here. Either press Ctrl D or use that icon here to just duplicate that group of characters and move them into different positions. And now you're having 10 more characters into your simulation. There are also tools where you can edit any characters individually. So, oops, let's remove this. Let's say you want that character to have different assets. You can select that guy here, open its character palette using the palette button here. You can see what the meshes is currently wearing. So right now he's having a t-shirt, some pants. So if you double click on any of the assets, you're removing it, and instead you can bring any other asset like the sweatshirt, and now you're having everybody with a t-shirt except that guy here. If you're liking the style of that guy, you can even copy his style here, select a bunch of characters there, and paste that style, so no they're all wearing the same assets than that guy here. There are also layers where you can time warp, scale the time, erase characters. Let's say you're not really happy with those guys here. You can just select those guys and add them to the erase list. So now those guys are not going to be rendered anymore if they are grayed out. If you don't want to even see them into the viewport, you can go into the cache proxy node, into the attribute editor, and you can go into the display attribute and specify that you want to hide the entity which are being killed. So they're still there, but they're just not drawn anymore, which means I'm hiding them here, but if I decide to remove that layer, they just come back. That layering information is going to be stored into a file, into a separate file, which will be stored next to the simulation cache. So as soon as you're making a new layering operation, you want to make sure that this gets saved properly before you're rendering your crowd. So I want to save this, and as soon as it's saved, now I can actually render this to get my character rendered with all the modification I've just done. So now you're seeing the people with the sweatshirt here, you're seeing the duplicated characters there, and the killed entity which are not rendered anymore. So I hope it makes sense for you, and see you in the next videos.